of various of these things that impinge on this topic, and then but hopefully that'll inspire others to contribute as well. As I was putting the charts together, I kind of tried to whittle it down a little bit, so hopefully I left enough room for others to contribute.
So why don't we start?
I'm gonna get rolling here. Okay, so I'm gonna share screen now, and I think I'm not going to put it into, well, okay, let me just do this first. Share screen. Let's do this. Let's see how this works. Okay, so are people seeing my PowerPoint now?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I'm not going to go into the full screen mode on there, because then it screws up the Zoom stuff for me. So I think this will work. Hopefully this is big enough to be visible. And as you know, I've done programs here before, and so hopefully my approach to this will be a little bit familiar. But so actually I want to talk about a couple of times I've done this in the past, the ghosts of ADG's past. About 2 years ago, I mean, I did one just, a few months ago too, but I see some resonances or some recurring themes. The priest who married Eve and me said that when he was in seminary, one of his homiletics professors said, "You only write one homily." And I guess this is to assuage the fears of a young priest who was afraid that what he was saying wasn't novel enough. It wasn't, inventing a new thing every week or whatever. And so I think, it's kind of natural that there are certain recurring themes that are gonna come back again and again, and that's what I mean by echoes of ADG's past. And then just as far as the overall structure of this thing, I like making little compact lists that try to pack a lot of meaning into a small space. That's why I love, physics theory and stuff like that. And so this is kind of the moral equivalent of that, the rules for life equivalent of that. So I talk about things like the Scout Law and other little ways I have of formulating, the things you all fail to do in life or aspire to do in life. And it's just hopefully it's interesting the way that thinking has evolved over time for me personally, and I'm wondering how if similar processes have gone on with other people thinking about how do we try to live a good life. Go ahead.
What does 1998 have to do with the presentation?
Oh, well, I'm just going to show you the first slides from a couple of ancient presentations I did. These two right here. Yeah. So it's just echoes of things that I did way back then. So one I did a couple of years ago was called Universalism in Religion and Science. And you might possibly remember a couple of these little graphics from that a couple of years ago. This window that tries to combine all these religious symbols of Judaism, Christianity, Islam, the Om of Hinduism, the wheel of Buddhism, yin yang of Taoism, and then that thing in the middle is the flaming chalice of Unitarian Universalism, which is where I spent quite a few, about a dozen years of my spiritual life in that denomination. And then my little nerdy fusion of electromagnetic theory and Genesis. Anyway, so what I was trying to do there was seek out a harmony in this tension that sometimes exists between faith and facts. But one thing to keep in mind, like harmony and tension. Well, a string makes no music until it's under tension, whether it's a vocal cord or a piano string or a guitar string. And so that tension doesn't mean disharmony, disunity. Tension actually is the source of the creativity in certain contexts. So anyway, that was one I did a couple of years ago. And then there's one that probably nobody remembers that I did back in 1998. But again, it was this idea of trying to reconcile these competing ideas. And so that was and I was kind of, and maybe in a way naively, trying to apply the same principles that we do in science to other domains. And the thing is, in science, those of us who play that game know, oh, here's the rules. You got a theory, somebody else has got a theory, somebody else has got a theory. If they make different predictions, well, then we do the experiment and somebody loses, and maybe more than one person loses, and maybe everybody loses. Maybe the experiment doesn't match any of the theories. And that might seem cruel to people who aren't in this game, but that's the rules of the game. If it fails, well, then go back to the drawing board and start over. And you just, once it's disproven, you let it go and you move on. But the thing is that social reconciliation, when I was a kid, I think I naively thought, oh, well, they simply don't understand. What they're thinking is logically inconsistent. And all I have to do is shine a nice bright spotlight on this flaw. Everybody will see, oh, obviously that's not correct. And then we'll go back to the drawing board and we'll all create new ideas for how to live our lives. Surprise, surprise, most people don't think that way. The world doesn't really work that way. But we do need to find ways to come together, to reconcile. But in some contexts, it's not about shining a bright spotlight on that one sticking point. It might be better instead to find lots of other things on which we do agree, and then kind of approach more judiciously those things that are really problems. But first, let's make it clear, we're all on the same team. We're all trying to make the world a better place in our various ways. We got different ideas about how to do that, but our hearts are all in the same place, and it's just a question of how do we move forward in the most effective way. So that's what I did way back in 1998, before I went off and joined the Unitarians for quite a while. So what am I doing now? Again, it's this trying to find balance in these opposing forces. So there's striking a balance between what can be actually competing virtues. So I think that it's easy to slice the world into two groups. But I think it's more complicated than that. I mean, if you're in the scientific world, there's the theorists and there's the experimentalists, and they have kind of different ways of approaching things. And I think in the moral sphere, there are maybe analogously, there's the theological approach, and then there's the more experience-based approach. Again, it's where do you get your data? Does you just start off in your head in these abstract ideas, these ideals, or do you start with look at the world? What's out there? How do we make sense of that world? And so whether you're of a more scientific bent or of a more human bent, there are these different ways of approaching the world, and we kind of select, and I think it's chicken or the egg to some degree. How we perceive the world also determines what kinds of problems we're equipped to solve. So if you're a scientist, engineer, technologist, if you're on that side of the world, then naturally you tend to say, well, what technological silver bullet can I invent to solve some big problem? But if you're a more human-oriented, humanistic sort of person, then you might think about solving the world's problems in terms of social and behavioral change, not thinking that some magic widget is going to solve all of our problems, but really we've got to figure out how we collectively can work together to solve problems. And of course, there are those who say, we already knew how to solve those problems 30 years ago. The only problem is we've screwed everything up and we got to get back to the good old days. And there are others who think maybe those old days weren't quite as good for everybody. And so we have to change our our society and our behavior in new ways, not just go back to the way things were 20, 30, 50 years ago. So I think there's a lot of different ways that we envision solving our problems. And it's not just slicing the world in two. There's lots of points of view. And so how do we pull the best out of all of these different approaches? And the approaches we use can actually wind up highlighting different virtues, it seems. So if you look at this little quote here, that's from Richard Feynman. That's something he said in his appendix to the Challenger report, the report on the Challenger space shuttle disaster. He said, "Science must take precedence over public relations. Nature cannot be fooled." And that's, I find myself thinking that when some people spout certain fantasies about the coronavirus, that you can't talk your way out of certain problems. And in the Challenger disaster, they may have talked each other into believing that the probability of success was 99.99 or whatever the hell it was, but that didn't change the physical reality that there was about a 1% chance that rocket was going to blow up and kill everybody. And that's still true for our rockets today. That's why we're not flying to space all that routinely. So we have to come to grips with the reality of things. But on the other hand, that point of view kind of makes science paramount. Science runs the show. Science is the source of all real truth. Everything else is just opinions. But on the other hand, our technologies really only acquire meaning and value in the context of human relationships and satisfying human needs. So we got to be a little careful. People like me have to be a little careful about making science into a god. It's because, cold hard facts aren't the whole story. There's also living, breathing human beings that we have to worry about. And so we need to strike this right balance between the human values and the logical rigor. So as I said, I love short lists. Experimentalists love big sets of data. But I get overwhelmed by huge, monstrous sets of data unless I have some theory or organizational principle to tie it all together. So this is, in some ways, I think it's just a deficit in me personally. I read very slowly. Like if something flashes on the screen during a movie or a television show, odds are I will not get done reading it before it disappears from the screen. It was a challenge, just scribbling fast enough to take all the notes in classes and stuff like that in school. For somebody who spent as much of their life in school as I did, it's kind of strange how slowly I read. And also like visual chaos is a real challenge for me. I mean, there's so many times where, I'll say, Eve, where is X? And, she walks over and it's right in front of me. I just couldn't see it. And when we were freshmen in college, her desk was a pile of garbage. It was just this big mound of junk. And I thought it was absurd. And yet she could just walk over and pick whatever it was she needed. She could just walk over and grab it. So chaos doesn't confuse her. And I think there's, lots of people, she is an experimentalist also in terms of her professional disposition. So not overwhelmed by lots of facts and lots of, complicated visual scene and what's going on here. But I really need order. And so my input-output facilities that are part of my brain and are a significant limitation, I think. But that's nudged me in a particular direction in my professional development. And it's also just influences how I view the world in general, religiously, theologically, whatever. So I need to find a mechanism with which to impose order on my environment. So that means, building mental models. I mean, it means my desk is a lot cleaner than Eve's, for instance. but it also means that it's helpful for me to build mental models of the world in order to make sense of all this chaos. Now, I know the map is not the territory. My mental model is not the world. It's just the piece of the world I happen to think I kind of sort of understand. So the tools and techniques that work for me may not be the best for everybody. But I just want to show you some of the tools I use to attack these problems, to think about our world and our place in it and how we should all try to get along. And I'm hoping that might inspire others to sort of try to describe, well, how do I attack these problems? How do I prioritize these various things we'd like to do in life? So as I said, nice compact little lists that explain everything. I like that stuff. So one of those that comes to mind is the Boy Scout law. I love being in Boy Scouts. It wasn't so much, earning merit badges and stuff like that. I had enough of that in school, but I really liked, going camping, hiking, canoeing, this illusion of self-reliance. But I really did learn some skills. I could actually survive on my own out in the woods. It was kind of fun. But one of the things that we recited over and over again, I'll remember till the day I die, I'm sure, is the Scout law. A Scout is trustworthy, loyal, helpful, friendly, courteous, kind, obedient, cheerful, thrifty, brave, clean, and reverent. And the other ex-Boy Scouts out there probably remember this too. Oh, I'm sorry, you're supposed to do that when you do that, right? Yeah, make the Scout sign. But as I thought about this, as a kid growing up, are these all equally important? They're just there. Are they all equally important? And are some of them kind of redundant or repetitive? So how do we prioritize these things? Now, of course, Jesus gave us a really nice, concise description. Love God, love your neighbor as yourself. So that's the most compact representation possible, I would think. But we do need a little more advice than that. We do need to unpack it a little more than that to figure out what we're doing in life sometimes. What would Jesus do is a pretty good guide, just like what would Buddha do and all those others. But let's unpack it a little bit and see. Well, so I go through and I say, well, are these all distinct, or are some of them kind of different facets of the same thing? So I colorized things that I thought, well, those are kind of the same thing in some ways, aren't they? Okay. So I sort them like that, and now I'll sort them into these lists, right? So the orthogonal virtues. Now these are the ones that I'm saying are not redundant. Orthogonal, like longitude, latitude, and altitude tells us where we are in the world, right? And so those are perpendicular to each other. They're different things. Moving, north is different from moving east. And you can move northeast by doing a little bit of north and a little bit of east. But those basic attributes are distinct. They're separate. And for people who are math nerds, in linear algebra, we have even higher dimensional spaces of orthogonality. Anyway, so they're just distinct. Separate characteristics. So, but then there are others I think being trustworthy is kind of different from being thrifty, is kind of different from being helpful, brave, clean. Those are pretty distinct. But there are others that cluster together. There are ones that I would call hierarchical virtues: loyalty, obedience, and reverence. Isn't obedience just kind of a manifestation of loyalty? Isn't reverence just loyalty and obedience to God? So those kind of seem like manifestations of the same thing. And then there's this third list, which I guess as a kid, I would have called the salesman's virtues, friendly, courteous, kind, cheerful, let me sell you a used car. I didn't think those were so important. And I think a lot of people who know me probably would not grab cheerful as the first adjective out of the bag to describe me personally. I take life too seriously a lot of the time. And so it never seemed like, I didn't think of that as an absolute moral virtue, being cheerful, Now, I'm not a salesman, so maybe that wasn't as important for me. Or maybe because I wasn't that way, I didn't become a salesman because I wouldn't have been good at it. So I sort of mentally, I think, as a kid, I think I sort of denigrated these things. I made them secondary. And as I've gotten old, I realized that that was probably a mistake, at least in some ways. Now, the thing is also, though, I also put those hierarchical virtues kind of second best, kind of second place to the ones in the first list. And I think that had to do with just the reality of my growing up when and where I did. I mean, events like Watergate and the war in Vietnam, that made me and most of the people who came of age in the 1970s very suspicious of loyalty and obedience and authority. There's, you just see, just because people have authority doesn't mean they're going to do smart things with it. They can do really dumb things. And one thing, another example, again, from my personal family connections here is there's a dramatic contrast in that attitude towards authority and, loyalty and obedience in my childhood family versus Eve's. Because my parents grew up in America. And, my dad and my mom's brothers went off and fought the war and fought the good fight and defeated evil. And, we were the good guys. What our leaders were telling us to do was really the good thing. But Eve's parents grew up in Nazi Germany. Her dad was like 12 in 1939 when Hitler started the war. And by the end of it, he was dragged into the war as teenage, possibly cannon fodder, but luckily not, because I'm here and she's here. And but anyway, the thing is that he had a very different attitude toward loyalty and obedience and authority. Growing up in that environment, you realize authority can get things wretchedly wrong, horrendously wrong. And so it can make one probably suspicious of all authority when you see it done that badly. And he also, he called his own mother Hai, which is German for shark, Haifisch. So that was just her name. He and his siblings just called her Hai. They called their mom the shark. That was her name. And so that it strikes me as like, I wonder if that's kind of reflecting that same kind of cavalier attitude towards traditional authority and stuff like that. Well, then fast forward a few decades, when Eve and I met, we were 18, freshman year of college. I was surprised when I visited her house that she just routinely referred to her dad as the creep, as if that were his proper name. No, he's not Orwin, he's the creep. And she would say that, to him, to her friends, to, just like that was his name. That was pretty strange to me. I mean, my household was a lot more respectful of authority than that. So different people's upbringing, different people's environment are going to cause them to set different priorities on these various virtues. And loyalty and obedience are ones that, I've got some challenges with, and I think Eve maybe even more so. So that doesn't mean one is right, the other is wrong, but it's just that it's worthwhile to recognize that the priorities we set can change our behaviors in the world. Oh yeah, and well, one other thing, just while I'm talking about Eve and me, it actually influenced how we raised our kids too, because my impulse was much more kind of respectful of traditional authority and stuff like that. So I would want it to, lay down rules, have guidelines, guardrails, and Eve's also being the experimentalist, was much more inclined to say, let the kids make their own mistakes. They'll figure it out. And I'm saying, why should they have to make their own mistakes? The mistakes are not new. They've been done over and over again. We already know what's going to happen. Why not save them the pain of making their own mistakes and, steer them out of the mistakes? But different people are different. Tommy was, my oldest was probably more inclined to take the advice and, steer out of the disaster before it happened. Sammy, not so much. He really wanted to go out and make his own mistakes and crash that skateboard and all those fun things. So I think whatever our good intentions are, there's also just the intrinsic, there's the environment in which we grew up, but there's also the intrinsic characteristics of the individual. And we're just going to find different ways to make our way in the world. Okay, so fast forward a few decades, and again, I'm playing around with, well, what are the real enduring values? Started to question Catholicism, and I've talked about that in other programs. What are the really enduring principles? So this is not virtues, but instead vices, the negative side of this. And it occurred to me that there are about a half dozen. I mean, there's there's the 10 Commandments, there's the 7 deadly sins. Well, how about are there the 6 theatrical sins? It occurs to me that these 6 behaviors are key ingredients for a popular movie and a lousy life. So the order in which I always think of these in my head is going around the circle: violence, dishonesty, greed, laziness, addiction, and promiscuity. Now, why is it around a circle or a hexagon instead of being just a line, right? A list. Why does it have this shape in my brain? Well, okay. For one thing, the sins of a caricature hippie are on the left, right? Laziness, addiction, and promiscuity, and love beads and long hair and not bathing and all that, right? The sins of a caricature ruthless, cutthroat competitor are on the right side: violence, dishonesty, greed. Now that doesn't mean that Republicans aren't capable of promiscuity and laziness, and it doesn't mean that Democrats aren't capable of violence, dishonesty, and greed. I mean, but in this sort of a caricature sense, that's why I did the right and the left that way. But also, I think there's a certain clustering of these things. There's a certain sort of relationship. The adjacency of them is kind of indicative of something that I'm playing with in my head. So, for instance, you could think of these 3 up here in this red oval are misuses of our bodies in some ways: violence, promiscuity, and addiction. And then you could think of these ones down here at the bottom. These are laziness and greed. There's this tension or this flawed outlook on what it means to be a real life grown-up and to work and be rewarded for that work. We all have some inclination to be lazy, and we all have some inclination to want stuff and not have to work too hard to get it.
Bill?
Yeah.
Yeah, let me interrupt a second here. It's interesting. When I think of sins, I usually think of some misdeed to others. And the way you framed it here, can some of this say, well, this is really misuse of myself, but how is that hurting anybody else? If I choose to be promiscuous, can I argue that that doesn't really impact anybody else? Why is that a sin?
Well, I mean, I think it is impacting other people, right? You're having this, insufficiently thought out physical relationships with a collection of other people, and I've met people who were, older than me, who were into, open marriage in the 70s and stuff like that. And they said it always wound up with a divorce. It never worked well. So I think there was a theory then that the only thing wrong with promiscuity was the dishonesty of it. You had gotten married, you had promised you would not have sex with anyone else, but now you were. But as long as we were honest about it, everything would work out fine. And then came the AIDS crisis, and then came, I mean, I don't know. And you know, I guess I'm a little old-fashioned in this particular sense, but I mean, I don't think there's a condom for your heart. I don't think you can necessarily make that not hurt anyone else or not hurt yourself. I think really these are unskillful behaviors is the way I would think of it. And that's maybe a slightly more Buddhist way of describing sin or error. It's unskillful behaviors. These are behaviors that tend to lead to a crappy life. If these are the underpinnings of your existence, life's probably not going to turn out that well. But it might make a great movie.
I want to comment that there was a book a couple of decades ago titled "In Praise of Laziness." And I didn't read the book, but I think the essence of it was that being lazy often motivated people to think of a faster, better, easier way to accomplish a certain goal, to innovate.
Right. Yeah, certainly. I mean, was it lazy to invent, a steam shovel that would dig ditches for us instead of doing it by hand?
Of course.
Yes. So I mean, yeah. So you could say engineering has a proud history of laziness. So finding easier ways to get work done.
Just Catholic virtues or vices? Because laziness is Darwinian. Every creature wants to do what it needs to do with as few calories as possible. So is this a Catholic list of vices, or what is it?
It's Bill Noonan's list of vices. It's stuff I worry about. Am I being lazy?
Stop worrying about laziness. You're all good. Darwin has
Well, the thing is, though, I think there is this tension. It's that in tension with greed. We would like to do as little as possible and get as much for it as do as little work as possible and be rewarded as handsomely as possible.
Yes.
I mean, that's wouldn't
Bill,
that be fun?
Bill,
Well, we found
Bill, isn't greed all a basis for capitalism?
Oh yeah.
Yes.
But so the thing is, can it be taken to excess? Is there a point where the lust for more stuff dominates everything else? So isn't
that what corruption comes in?
Well, yeah. Well, and I think in a huge, vivid example, I mean, some sins are more complex and they touch on a lot of these things. How about slavery? I think slavery hits about 5 of these 6. I mean, addiction, not necessarily specifically, but I mean, slavery manages to hit like 5 of those buttons all at once. I want stuff. I don't want to work for it. I'll make somebody else do it, and I'll take all of that stuff.
You're addicted to it also, so there is addiction in that.
Well, yeah. So addiction is, you can do that. You can have an expansive definition of addiction that you get dependent on, on that system. So you could even have the full 6 in that sense. But I think there's also a deep dishonesty. So there's obviously that laziness, greed aspect of slavery. There's a deep dishonesty of, in order to convince myself this is okay, I have to deny the humanity of these other people. That's the only way it works.
Can I interrupt, Bill?
Sure.
Going back to laziness, isn't modern technology promotes laziness?
Well, the thing is, I work really hard, sitting right at this desk, many hours per day. That's physical laziness. But I'm working hard to try to do something worthwhile for the world. It just involves, pushing little buttons on the keyboard here and, scribbling equations.
Well, I think you're tap dancing to keep laziness on this list, and I don't think it belongs there, honestly.
And yes, great. That's exactly the idea that I'm trying to convey, is that this is me. This is a map of my picture of the world. It's not a picture of the world. It's the stuff I think about and worry about. But if you think about the ingredients of an entertaining movie, laziness and greed, those are fantastically useful. John Cleese, or, pick somebody. I mean, there's, A Fish Called Wanda is one that pops to mind, or, whatever. There's lots of, these ingredients, you pour these in big time to make an interesting, drama, comedy, whatever. And so that's, but I was thinking, well, yeah, okay, so these make for good movies. Do they make for good lives? Maybe not so much. And so I think there is a need, though, for us to try to find something worthwhile that we will contribute to the world, and not just find the easiest possible way to make a boatload of money. Find something where I can find how my gifts can contribute to the betterment of society. And so that's why I have some anxiety about that. But also, I think that the whole question of capitalism versus socialism revolves around that purple bubble to some degree. That, how much do I deserve to get, and how hard should I have to work to get it?
Bill, all of this comes down to always that balance between self-interest and interest for others. Love and
Right.
caring for somebody else, and love and caring for yourself. And
Good point.
it's a tough thing to balance out almost every day. But that's the balance. You are an individual, but you're also part of the broader world. You're part of your community. You're part of your family. And you can't ignore the interests or the benefits for them in favor of your own all the time. And neither can you sacrifice all of yours for their interests all the time.
Agreed.
That's
It's not.
called, that's called self-interest rightly understood.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
And my dad worked his ass off all of his life. And, I think, I sometimes think he was too afraid of not being useful. He had a desperate need to be useful and productive, and, just had to go. And so, I mean, I probably, I don't work as hard as he did in a lot of ways, but I mean, there is that feature in our personalities and our personal histories. But I think also, if you think about capitalism, it does have it does have perverse excesses, but it also does have a nice balancing act between these two things. I want more stuff. Huh?
It's a motivating force for a lot of people.
Right. I want stuff, but I'm going to have to work to get the stuff. So but the thing is, so how much stuff do I need? More. Wait a minute, I'm too tired. That's enough. So that puts a limit on that greed. Eventually, it's like, okay, I think I've got enough now. I need to go sleep.
Well,
Can I
you
add-
think
can I add
greed and
something?
economic value, and maybe the greed is also trying to contribute something to the world. And that's your driving force. And that's the same kind of maybe greed to accomplish or greed to affect the world. You know what I'm saying? It's not just economic.
Right.
Yeah. There's good manifestations of it too, as well. Just and so I'm going to get to the virtuous cycle as opposed to the cycle of screw ups.
Bill, I'd like to hear your brother's opinion about your father.
I think it's true, and I think this is highly personal. I think Bill has put laziness on there from what his conditioning, my conditioning, and I'm with the other speaker. I just don't think laziness is in this. It wouldn't work for me. I think, do as little as you can for the best good.
Yeah. Well, and also, I mean, we're all getting older. At some point, you got to come to grips with the fact that, it may be time to retire at some point. And personally, that's still something that I don't know how to come to grips with. I don't have enough hobbies. My dad didn't have enough hobbies. As soon as he retired, he had to go back and work as a consultant. Let
me jump in. I want to support Bill's addition to laziness, because to me, I see it as an affront to the community, right? If I'm not contributing what I can contribute, then I'm hurting the community. If my entire family is cleaning the house together and my son decides he's not going to participate, right, because he's too lazy, he's hurting the rest of the family. He's not contributing his fair share. So I support it, Bill.
And I think maybe the word sin is part of the problem. Now, this is something I learned from my older brother. Sin, the genesis of it is a Roman archery. It was missing the mark. It was the distance from a goal, as opposed to a debt or a whatever. But I think if you think of it as skillful behaviors and unskillful behaviors, behaviors that will make for a more worthwhile life, or behaviors that will make for a less worthwhile life. And so, yeah, I know that this is all about, can virtues be taken to an extreme where they become problematic? Yeah, if you get so if you have such a pathological aversion to laziness that you're working yourself to death, or you're like a border collie without a job in a small apartment bouncing off the walls because, like, I gotta go herd sheep, I gotta go herd sheep, I gotta go herd sheep. Well, okay, you're 70 years old, you're retired, you don't have to herd sheep or whatever it was anymore. So yeah, I think that's the thing, is that loyalty and honesty aren't the only virtues that can be taken to pathological extremes, but those are a couple that I'm thinking about right now.
Excuse me, but did Dale Townsend have his hand up a little while ago?
I did. Could I say something?
Yeah. Oh, go ahead. Sure.
When we were back talking about greed, I was just thinking of it on a different level, not a personal level, but as we are working on the church budget, are we spending too much on us and our programs that entertain us or are for us? Should we be spending more money on missions and outreach? That's where I see the issue.
Yeah. So how do we allocate the resources, our personal resources and the world's resources, the society's resources? Well, and so it does get into that question of good for me, good for them, good for the wider world. Yeah.
Well, we're encouraged on a personal level to give 10%. Now, as a body of believers at a church, I think it would be wise that the church gives 10% of their income.
Very good point.
So,
yeah.
If I could jump in also, Bill, we kind of launched into this whole topic without really addressing, so what do we mean by virtue? Why virtue? And what is the benefit of virtue? I mean, I think intrinsically we all believe or accept, somehow virtue is good and some of these other things are bad. But context can be key in some cases. For example, dishonesty is someone who is lying about their poverty or stealing, being dishonest. Is that sinful, or are they attempting to do something worthy to save their family or support their family?
Oh yeah. The people concealing Anne Frank lying to the Nazis. Yeah, so I think that is kind of what I'm getting at here is that any particular virtue or vice or whatever that gets blown completely out of proportion, can be problematical. And so, yeah, so I think that, our language gets challenging. I think the Buddhist terminology of, skillful and unskillful behaviors is maybe better than sins, because it's a pretty weighted term, I realize. But skillful and unskillful behaviors seems like
yeah, that language kind of suggests, well, I'm able to do something, or I'm unable or less able to do something, which doesn't really seem very satisfying to me.
Oh, well, I think when the Buddhists say it, they mean it is an unskillful way to live your life. It's not that you're not good at lying. You might be very good at lying. You might be very skilled at lying, but that's not the point. I mean, the point is that that is not a skillful way in a big sense in a transcendent sense, it is not a skillful way to live your life if you are obsessed with possessions, if you are, and so, but yeah, I think the language is a challenge. I mean, I think we're trying to put our hearts in the right place. We're trying to move our lives in a constructive direction. And that's kind of what this is all about. So, yeah. So, if you think, if this gets you thinking about stuff, I mean, it might be interesting to say, well, what's your landscape of
Well, another question.
and what you'd want to do with them?
Another question for you, Bill. You touched on it with your own children, or kind of glanced by it, perhaps. How does one teach or acquire virtue?
Yeah.
Is it taught? Is it learned? Is it simply discovered through life experience? How does one acquire virtue?
And I think that also
these are goods.
It's different for different people. I think Eve is the empiricist, so for her it's experience. It's do the experiment, see what happens. Now I know. For me, I'm the theorist. I want the abstractions. I don't have enough bandwidth. I can't acquire all the data. So give me a framework, and then I'll check that framework against reality. But I just don't have the same perception. I don't have the same skills of perception that other people do. And so I need that crutch. I need that framework to hang things together, and then I can layer on these individual experiences that I do understand and say, oh yeah, that still sort of works. That makes sense. And so it's so I think the pedagogical approach is not going to work for everybody, because if you're a very empirically driven person, a very experimental kind of person, then then maybe the way I conceptualize the world isn't the best way to get at it. But if you're somebody like me who then maybe you do need more of that framework to support it all, and can't just say, here, toss you out into the world and figure it out for yourself. So I think there's, I think it may be mental characteristics.
I think that always goes, not always, a term you should never use, like never use that either. It's influenced so much by nurture versus nature, which is the ongoing debate of which is a priority and which is more important. But when you're talking about reinforcing what you would like to do or believe, it's like if you took an interview or an exam with the church, for instance, and ask everyone, do you believe in God? What is God? What do you do to manifest your belief? You would get expressions all across the board, I think. And I think one of the reasons a lot of people go to church, including myself, is to try to find answers to some of these things that you don't have. And is that good?
Oh, here's the answer. You want to know what God is? Here's what God is.
Yeah, well, that's my struggle a lot of times when I talk to other people. But anyway. Okay.
Yeah, no, but I'm with you. Yeah, and I think the thing is that little Trinitarian credo that I showed there, Trinitarian Universalist credo, that was something I did. The first version of it back with the Unitarians. There's a little program called Building Your Own Theology, and I really enjoyed that, because the idea is that one size doesn't fit all. The Nicene Creed didn't fit for me anymore in the Catholic Church. But I did feel, and a lot of people just say, okay, chuck that, I don't need it, forget about it. But I mean, I desired to have some articulation of, well, what if I don't believe that, what do I believe? And so different people have different needs to invent these frameworks. And other people are perfectly happy to live their lives without them.
Or adopt.
I don't know if this is fair to ask, but I'm sure interested in the last 1/3 of your presentation also. Is there any way we could get through that and then have more detailed discussions?
Oh yeah, sure. Yeah, I don't want to, dominate the whole show. I mean, I did say I wanted to cultivate the discussion, so I'm happy when it gets going. There's just a few more things. So so this is kind of a negative picture of the world, or a negative picture of behaviors to be avoided or to be cautious of, let's say, at least. And there's, we can see lots of ways in which those kinds of behaviors can screw up a life or the world at large. So I kind of wanted to make honesty paramount. That it was just the ultimate reality, the ultimate truth. And so, as we just alluded to, the Nicene Creed and Catholic dogma became, for me, a test of loyalty versus honesty. In one of those earlier programs that I alluded to, I looked at this particular piece here of the Nicene Creed, and I would say it every Sunday. Show up every Sunday, every holy day of obligation. And do I believe all of that stuff? What does it mean to be eternally begotten from the Father, God from God, light from light, true God from true God, begotten, not made? What does that mean? It's all the 3=1 stuff and all that. Did he have a prior existence and then come down from heaven and jump into his man suit? Or was he, did I have a prior existence in a place called heaven? And then, just a lot of stuff that I started like leaving out pieces of it. When we're all unison saying this, I would leave out phrases here and there, or I would have poetic interpretations of it all. And I at some point decided, this is too much effort. It's just too much weighing me down. I mean, I want to grow spiritually, and this is just impeding progress. So, but the thing is, being Irish Catholic was really important to my dad. It was really important to lots of families, right? Your ethnic and religious identity is really important, and so letting go of that was really painful, because as much as I cling to that honesty thing, it's like, I can't say this if I don't believe this. That element of loyalty, in a certain sense, when most people recite this, every Sunday morning, they don't mean every single word of it. What they mean collectively, it's kind of like a hymn or whatever else. It just collectively means, I'm one of the team. I'm one of us. We're all in this together. See, we all know the same, we all know this tune. We all know these words. So it's a sense of group identity and loyalty and commitment to a tradition and stuff like that. And, most people aren't as obsessed with the details as I am. So they haven't worried about, well, what really does it mean to say begotten, not made? What does that mean? But that became agony for me. To just say, well, wait a minute, am I being honest? But how can I be honest and also be loyal, be true to tradition and my family heritage? When push came to shove, I thought honesty was more important. So that's where I landed in that struggle. Other people landed in a different place. But the thing is honesty an absolute virtue? Because there's a thing, we hear the phrase brutal honesty. He's brutally honest. So let's think about that. And you heard me talk before about Mr. Spock, my pal, because he didn't understand human beings either. And so I guess I associated myself with him. He, I don't know, for those of you who don't, follow this stuff, I mean, he is a very vivid Christ symbol in one of those movies. He actually lays down his life for his friends, is laid to rest, and then is resurrected. So, you can't get a more heavy-handed Christ symbol than that. And in many ways, he was the virtuous guy on the bridge there. I mean, Captain Kirk, you never knew what kind of crap he was going to pull. He was famous for cheating on the big exam in Starfleet Academy. He didn't follow the rules. That was a defining characteristic. But Spock was the good guy in a certain sense, at least to a science nerd, maybe. But the thing is, he could hurt people's feelings with impunity. He could just step on human emotion whenever it just happened, because it's like, oh, I didn't know that was there. It's like he just can't even perceive that. He's not human.
Emotions.
What's that?
He didn't have emotions.
Well, except that he did sometimes when it worked for dramatic effect. But yeah, but he didn't understand emotions. That was clear, right? They weren't on his radar screen. It was like invisible colors, It's like we don't see ultraviolet light. He didn't see human emotions. So therefore, he could step on them right and left, and it didn't matter. It was not a moral stain on him that he was mean to people, because he didn't know he was being mean to people. He had no perception of this stuff. But I wonder, that obviously that's a made-up character, but is that kind of brutal honesty a moral blind spot for some scientists, like me, for instance? So now, as I said before in other programs, I think confession is, it's not a bad thing. It's not a bad thing, but I think it has to be first person singular. It cannot be mistakes were made and regret is felt. It's got to be specific. And now Rob has definitely heard these stories, and not that long ago. But these are a couple of personal confessions that make it vividly apparent to me that I was getting something really badly wrong and not knowing it, and having a certain self-righteousness while getting these ideas wrong. So one of them is, you see I'm wearing a crew team shirt from MIT. There was an event that happened in the spring of '79, my freshman year, that was a vivid example of my own kind of naive application of brutal honesty. After the school year is over, there's one more big race in the spring, and some of the guys on the heavyweight team weren't available to be in that race. So to fill out one of our boats, we grabbed a guy from the lightweight team, and so he was rowing with us, and he was a really good oarsman, so that was fine. But there was one guy in our boat that just gave this guy endless crap, nonstop, over and over and over again. It was so annoying, all about how lightweights aren't real men, lightweights are, this, that, all kinds of insults about lightweights are subhuman, and I just got so sick of it after a week of this crap that I finally said to this guy, and then there are those heavyweights who would be lightweights if not for some useless fat around their midsections. Well, the thing is, I said it pretty angrily. He said all of his insults with winking and and all that kind of stuff. I sounded pissed because I was pissed. He almost cried. "You go to hell, Bill!" Like, he was so upset that I said this. I was like, dish it out, but you can't take it. What the hell? You've been doing this for a week. I say one thing and you're on the verge of tears. Crucial difference. What I said was true. It was exactly true. If this guy had been in shape, he would have been a lightweight. Well, that's probably why he was all obsessing on this shit, because I failed to perceive it. The recreational cruelty made me so mad that I just had to do something about that guy to shut him up. Well, I did shut him up. He didn't say that anymore. And that was the last week of his rowing career. He never came back the next year. I don't know if it was just me but the thing is, the other guy, the lightweight that he was insulting all the time, Russ Murphy, became a member of the U.S. lightweight national team. He was a fantastic oarsman, had a long, illustrious career. So it was that other guy's own insecurity was the reason for doing all that stuff. And I was too naive to see that. All I saw was he is playing games with insulting people, and he's got to stop that. My righteous anger became a problem.
Crew is a team sport.
Yeah.
Was the coach? Where was the coach in this? Why wasn't the coach doing what you eventually did?
Oh, well, no. But the thing is, we were in our teens and 20s. I mean, so we would hop in the van and go to practice together. We'd be hanging out together. The coach wasn't, and we were together for a week. We were off campus. They would take because the Charles River at that time of year is loaded with recreational boaters and stuff like that. So we would go off to Dartmouth or Cornell to train before this big thing, because their waters were a lot quieter than Boston. So yeah, we were on our own. We're just living together for a week, and so that's why. Yeah. So yeah, the coach wasn't part of the picture here when all this stuff was going on.
You've got less than 10 minutes to go.
Right. Yeah. So I should wrap it up here.
Well, just go ahead. Yeah. So another one,
and Rob knows this one very well because this was on the bus when we were kids. This guy, Chris Devine, who lived around the corner of us, probably less than 100 yards from our house, as the crow flies. And he would torture the crap out of kids. We had a fairly long ride to the middle school, the junior high and high school where we lived. And he would just torture the crap out of kids for no discernible reason. It was just recreational cruelty. Just cruelty because it's fun to be cruel. One kid got plastic surgery on his ears because he got so much crap from this kid. I mean, it was just infuriating. I wasn't particularly the victim of this guy's crap, but it just made me so angry. I never did anything about it. But then, and he was just he was smart, but totally misdirected. It was really sad. Well, a few years later, after I was out of high school and all that stuff, I heard that he died. And I was happy. And that kind of made me realize that's pretty screwed up. I mean, he was not a nice person, but for me to be happy that he was dead, to say, oh, the world's a slightly better place with him not in it, that was my reflexive reaction. When this misguided soul in his 20s, probably his late 20s, maybe his 30, I forget, wound up drugs, alcohol, whatever it was. It's like, wow, that's, yes, you can find a bunch of facts and a bunch of, very narrow-minded interpretations of what he contributed to the neighborhood or society or whatever to justify that verdict. But that's really cruel. That there's something is way out of calibration in my brain that I could have that reaction. Well, okay. Has anybody ever been called brutally kind? We know about brutal honesty, but what about brutal kindness? That doesn't exist. Is kindness really that frivolous virtue that I thought it was when I was, in my teens or whatever? Maybe that's really the linchpin of everything, and that I really insufficiently valued that. So instead of talking about vices and misguided behaviors and stuff like that, what if we try to flip the polarity of all those things? Because peace is really more than just the absence of violence. Generosity is more than just the absence of criminal malfeasance and greed. Maybe the thing to focus on is not all the pitfalls, all the things that are wrong, but instead all the what to be drawn toward, not to be what you're opposed to. Don't define your goals in life by what you don't want to be, but what you want to be. So instead of violence, dishonesty, greed, laziness, addiction, and promiscuity, what if we make not exactly one for one in verses, but peace, honesty, generosity, inspiration. See, laziness is like, I'm not inspired to do anything. Is that so? What about the reverse? Inspiration, addiction. I cannot control something; it controls me. So how about freedom, fidelity, but the thing is, kindness was kind of missing, and it kind of ties them all together. And I'm reminded of 1 Corinthians for loving kindness, and St. Paul says, if I, make all kinds of sacrifices, give everything I have, and, even, give my body away to be burned, but I have not love, I've accomplished nothing. Not word for word, but you remember. So this loving kindness, and also I like the phrase loving kindness is one that Buddhists are very fond of, because they're a little suspicious of love. Because the root of all suffering, the goal of Buddhism is to alleviate all suffering, and the source of all suffering is attachment of all kinds. It's the attachment to these transitory things that is ultimately the source of our loss and our suffering, even our own bodies. If we can just see that, that neural impulse as just a thing that's happening to my left foot, but not taking over my consciousness, it's just a thing that's happening in the world, in the body. So that detachment is this ultimate virtue for a lot of Buddhists. And so therefore love is a little bit of a problem, because that seems to be the ultimate attachment. And so the phrase they'll often use is loving kindness as kind of one thing. And I think that's, and obviously we all have, difficulties with the multiple meanings of love. And so but using that particular phrase, that loving kindness, really does get to the heart of this other element. And the thing that angered me so much about that kid on the crew team and that kid on the school bus was recreational cruelty, being cruel just for the hell of it, just because you like being cruel. Well, shouldn't that have made it obvious to me that kindness is an ultimate virtue, that it belongs on the list? And so that's most of what I had in mind for this morning. I did toss in these other things here about my need to order the universe that I did in previous programs. But that's most of what I've got to say this morning. So.
I would like to get a copy of your U-graphs, if you could send them to me, and maybe other people here want them as well.
Yeah, okay, I can send them out to the list. People can hit the delete key if they don't want them.
Bill,
Yeah.
I have a question. I was puzzled by in your hexagon, especially given your story about the guy on the bus, why you didn't include cruelty or meanness in this list, because I think that's a lot worse than some of these things.
Well, right. So this is just pictures out of my brain, and what I found out was this picture was missing something. So this was a picture. This was a snapshot of what was in my head at a certain point in time, and then I realized there's a hole in the middle. There's a hole somewhere. Whether does it belong in the middle, or could we lay out the geometry in some other way? But yeah,
many of us realize there's a hole in your head.
I might pop in a minute to say I resonate with what you said about feeling like it was a good thing when a certain guy died, and if you take that to the next level, I'm sure we all felt like it would be a good thing when Hitler died,
Yeah.
And it's almost as if you can see things from two different perspectives. If you try, you can kind of go, the amount of damage this individual or this system or whatever is doing to the wider circle is so intense that the lesser of the evils right now would be for him to be stopped,
Right. And so, yeah, so like those plots to assassinate Hitler, you know, and one bomb that vividly failed. Yeah.
Involved in it, right. But then there's also the sense that if you were able to go down to the microcosm of a person, like the boy on the bus, and you think about probably when he was treated badly during his times of vulnerability and whatever, and when all of this developed as some kind of a defense mechanism because the world was really not a very safe place for him as an individual, then I think there's room to, and so it's almost like, you know, well, I think of some of the people that are most problematic, you know, that we've had to deal with in our country in the last 4 years, and the amount of, you know, I kind of go, if some of these individuals, if we could get down to them as individuals, we would find out the amount of pain and defense mechanism that they have brought to bear at the sacrifice of honesty and all sorts of the other sacrifice of honesty and kindness and all of the other traits. So I just wonder if it isn't kind of twofold, you know, we need to be helping individuals to not be so screwed up, but we can't let individuals get too much power when they are screwed up. Something like that.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and also, you know, error amplification on social media. It's one thing for people to be able to say whatever they want with their circle of a dozen friends, but if you're saying it to millions of people, is there a different level of responsibility? If you're gonna magnify things but to that degree, is there a greater societal collective responsibility?
Yeah, that bus thing is a pretty good example, really.
Yeah, well, because he wasn't Hitler.
No, but he
didn't.
But he was certainly impacting the emotional development of everybody on that bus.
Yeah, yeah. So I mean, but the thing is, and this is a challenge for universalism. I claim to be a universalist, so I'm going to say there is no hell. A just and loving God damns no one to hell for eternity. God doesn't make junk. Anybody can be saved in some way or other.
No, was this, you just said Chris Devine was a Hitler. Now I knew this kid.
No, he was not. He was not.
No, and I certainly didn't say he was a Hitler. I'm just talking about just the phenomenon of hurt people hurting the larger circle.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I was saying that it did not, I mean, I can sort of buy the argument of, is it okay to assassinate Hitler under certain circumstances? Yeah, you know, but I'm saying, but that was misguided for me to try to apply that kind of logic to Chris. He wasn't of that magnitude. He was a misguided soul, you know, and so it was really wrong for me to jump to that place in my own head.
But it's a difference to go, well, I'm sort of satisfied that kind of, you know, negative stuff isn't being spewed on the world. So in some way, you know, I'm sort of satisfied that that's not happening anymore. It's a difference between that and you're devaluing him to the place where you would actually kill him.
Right. So is everybody, do we really believe every human being is a beloved child of God? That's a big lift sometimes to really say that about somebody who we think does enormous harm. You know, I remember Elton John wrote a song about after the assassination of John Lennon, and it had a line in it about you know, how an insect can destroy so much grain. You know, he was turning this human being who killed John Lennon into an insect. And I mean, I understood that. I understood that lyric perfectly. But the thing is, we got to be careful when we decide that the bad guys are insects, are not even human anymore.
Yeah.
We're going to a scary place there, in terms of our own souls, our own hearts.
Well, part of it might be influenced too by your belief of the control of the world. Are people in charge of it? Is God's very precise plan for everybody in charge of it? Is an overall spiritual being somewhere out in the universe in charge of it, kind of loosely letting things happen? Because maybe these individuals who are such a challenge for us to accept are there for a reason to utz us into doing something better with our lives and better with humanity. You know, and again, is everybody innately good? I don't know. I don't know. And that's living with those kind of questions and seeing what it calls upon you, how it calls upon you to respond.
Yeah, and I think we're all innately good and bad. We're all innately generous and greedy. We're all innately inspired and lazy. We're all innately everything. There are no red and blue states. There's only purple states.
I agree.
I don't think there's even red and blue people. I think there's only purple people if we really think about stuff.
Anyway, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So
well, maybe
yeah,
that's
so
a good wrapping point here, Bill. Any last thoughts?
well, I'd like to see other people's mental map of the moral universe if they're so inclined. So if anybody else is inspired to think about how they would arrange their snapshot of the universe, or just any kind of interesting, compelling moral question that's on your mind. You know, I'd encourage other people to do programs like this too, because I like getting a chance to just talk about us. It's great to hear from college professors that have done, brilliant things. That's good too. But I also think it's nice to hear about us and what we think and believe and how we can help each other to understand.
Well, thank you, Bill. Very, very thought-provoking, a lot of good ideas. It's great that you kind of laid yourself raw out here in front of everybody. So on behalf of the group, thanks to you so much for all the great thoughts. And
Well, Rick, I want to follow up with one thing Bill said. So he's asking for suggestions about future discussions of this sort. So we're always want to have topic suggestions. So please, if you have suggestions, please email them to Bill, myself, and maybe all of us. All right, so it's now 9:54. So we need to cut off.